The first thing I knew was the cold. It wasn't just the damp air of the French morning seeping through the canvas of the tent. It was a deeper cold, one that lived in your bones. I opened my eyes on this day, September 5th, 1944. The world was still grey, a pale, washed-out version of itself before the sun had a chance to climb over the shattered tree line. A voice, rough and familiar, cut through the quiet.
"Rise and shine, lads."
Around me, others stirred, groaning and muttering. We were a collection of ghosts in the dim light, pulling ourselves from the brief escape of sleep back into the grim reality of the front line. I sat up, my back protesting, and reached for my boots. They were stiff with dried mud and cold to the touch. Putting them on was the first battle of the day, a struggle to force my tired feet back into their leather prisons. This was our life now, a constant cycle of discomfort and duty, far from the warm beds and soft mornings we all remembered from home. The air inside the tent was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and stale cigarette smoke. Outside, the world was slowly coming into focus. We were a small cog in a vast war machine, and the machine was beginning to turn. My thoughts, as they often did in these first waking moments, drifted home. Shaking the memories away, I finished lacing my boots. There was no time for daydreams. The war waited for no one. Once dressed, my coarse, olive-drab uniform, the morning routine truly began. We stumbled out of the tents into the crisp air, lining up near the field kitchen. Breakfast was porridge, a grey, lumpy substance that was more about fuel than flavour. We ate it quickly, standing up, our mess tins clutched in our cold hands. My rifle was my constant companion. It was a Lee Enfield, a heavy piece of wood and steel that felt like an extension of my own arm. After breakfast, I found a dry patch of ground and began the ritual of cleaning it. I carefully disassembled it, wiping each component with an oily rag until it gleamed. I checked the bolt, the magazine, the barrel, ensuring there was no mud or grit that could cause a jam at the worst possible moment. Next came the rest of my kit. The webbing was a complex harness of straps and pouches. I checked each pouch, ammunition clips, 2 hand grenades with their pins securely in place, my water canteen, and a small first aid dressing. Then came the heavy pack, containing a blanket, a ground sheet, spare socks, and my rations for the day. Finally, the steel helmet. It felt heavy and awkward, but we all knew the grim protection it offered. Strapping it on was the final act of transformation, turning me from a young man named Tom into just another soldier. The weight was immense, a constant dragging burden on my shoulders and back. Every piece of equipment had a purpose. From the shovel used to dig a life-saving foxhole to the bayonet fixed to my rifle, it was all designed for one thing: conflict. As I stood up, feeling the strain of the full pack, I looked at the men around me. We were no longer just boys from farms and cities. We were walking arsenals, prepared for the day's grim work. With our gear sorted, Sergeant Miller's voice barked out the orders. "On your feet, we're practicing advancing under fire." We scrambled into formation, our squads moving across a muddy field pockmarked with old shell craters. The sergeant would yell, "Contact front!" and we would drop to the ground, our hearts pounding, and crawl forward on our bellies. Live rounds from our own machine guns would whistle over our heads, a terrifying but effective way to teach us to stay low. The man crawling through the mud next to me was named Charlie. He was a skinny lad from Manchester who had a knack for telling terrible jokes at the worst possible moments. When we were pressed against the cold earth, the smell of cordite in the air, a shared look with Charlie was enough. We relied on each other completely. We learned to read each other's movements, to anticipate a signal, to know when someone needed a hand or a word of encouragement. These men, Charlie, Big Dave from Scotland, Quiet James from the countryside, they were my family now. We shared everything, from our last cigarette to our deepest fears. During a short break in the training, we huddled together, our backs against a ruined stone wall. Charlie pulled out a crumpled photo of his girl, showing it around for the 10th time. "She says the roses are blooming in the garden," he said, his voice softer than usual. We all had our own talismans, our own connections to the world we had left behind. Dave would talk about the fishing on the locks, and I would think about the quiet streets of my hometown. But the camaraderie was also forged in shared hardship and gallows humor. When the rain started, turning the field into a quagmire, someone would inevitably complain. "Lovely weather for a picnic," another would retort. This dark humor was our shield against despair. On the front line, You learned quickly that you couldn't survive alone. Your life was in the hands of the men beside you, your brothers in arms. Lunch was a welcome, if brief, interruption. There was no formal mess hall, just the spot where you happened to be when the call came. Today it was the familiar tin of bully beef and a handful of hardtack biscuits. The biscuits were so hard you risked breaking a tooth if you weren't careful. The best way to eat them was to dunk them in your tea until they softened into a mush. The tea itself, brewed in a large, smoky kettle, was strong, sweet, and life-giving. It was the one luxury we had, a warm taste of civilization in the middle of chaos. Free time was a precious and fleeting commodity. If we weren't immediately on patrol or assigned to a work detail, we might get an hour to ourselves. Most of us used this time for simple, quiet things. Some men would find a spot to lie down, helmet over their eyes, and catch a few precious moments of sleep. Others would dedicate themselves to mending their uniforms, sewing on a button or patching a tear with a small needle and thread. It was a way to maintain a small sense of order and dignity in a world that was constantly trying to strip it away from you. I often spent my free moments with a worn paperback book I kept in my pack. The pages were soft and dog-eared, the cover long gone. It was a collection of poems, and reading them felt like a secret act of rebellion. The words spoke of beauty, love, and nature, things that felt a million miles away. But for a few minutes they could transport me. I would sit with my back against a tree, the distant rumble of artillery a constant backdrop, and lose myself in a verse about a quiet English countryside. Sometimes a small group would gather for a game of cards. The deck was old and stained, the faces of the kings and queens faded from use. The stakes were never money, which we had little of, but cigarettes or chores. These small rituals were not just ways to pass the time. They were acts of survival, essential for keeping our minds from breaking under the relentless strain of the front. As dusk began to settle, a different kind of tension filled the air. My squad was tasked with a reconnaissance mission along a nearby ridge. We saw nothing, thankfully, but the return to camp did little to ease the knot in my stomach. The day was over, but the night brought its own set of anxieties. Back in the tent, by candlelight, I would write home. I found my small notepad and began to write to my mother. "Dearest Mum," I started. How could I explain this life to her? So I didn't. I wrote about the food being all right, about the friends I'd made. Each word was a bridge back to a life of peace and safety. I ended the letter as I always did. "Don't worry about me. I'm being careful. All my love, Tom." Lying back on the hard ground, I closed my eyes with the desperate, simple hope that I would survive to see another sunrise.